What's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to talk about how to find the IQR and outliers of any data set. So just a couple of things that I need to do first in order to find my IQR and outliers, and that's making sure that my data set is always in order from least to greatest, because I need to find a few things in order to find my IQR and outliers. So once I put my data set in order from least to greatest, I can find my IQR, which is my interquartile range. And I can find that by simply taking my Q3, or my third quartile, and subtracting my first quartile. And that's going to give me the middle 50% of my data from Q3 to Q1. And I'm just subtracting those two, and that's my IQR. Very, very easy to find. Once I find that, I can then determine if I have any outliers. Outliers are going to be data points that are very different from kind of the other ones on there. When we think about, maybe we have a room full of teachers, and teachers have our certain salary and yada yada yada, and maybe Elon Musk walks in and people started talking about salaries. Clearly Elon Musk would be an outlier. His is much different than ours. So an outlier is going to be a data point that is very different from the rest. Now for the outliers, we actually have to check two. We have to check the lower bounds, and we have to check our upper bounds. Our lower bound is going to be Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR. And if any number, that right there is going to give me a number. And if any number in my data set is less than that, then that number is an outlier. For my upper bounds, I must check by doing Q3 plus 1.5 times IQR. That is going to give me another number. And if any data point in my data set is greater than this number, then it is an outlier. So with that being said, let's jump straight into our first example. Now, number one says find the IQR and determine if there are any outliers. Well, the first thing that I want to do is I want to put my data set in order from least to greatest. Looking at this one, it is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find my Q3 and my Q1 so that I can find my IQR. So I'm going to cross off, cross off, cross off. And I'm going to keep following this pattern until I'm left with one number in the middle, and that is Q2. From there, I can find my Q1, and we can find Q3. So once I have these two, my IQR is simply Q3 minus Q1. So Q3 is 10. Minus Q1 is 4, so my IQR is 6. And now, that's pretty easy, because at this point, I can look at my formula for my outliers. So remember, for outliers, I've got to check my lower bounds. And so my lower bound is Q1 minus 1.5 times my IQR. In Q1, we got 4 minus 1.5 times my IQR of 6 is 9. 4 minus 9 gives me negative 5. Now, it is okay to get a negative number. It's okay to get decimals at times. It's going to happen. So I need to ask myself, is there any number in my data set less than negative 5? Well, clearly my smallest number is 2, and that's not less than negative 5. Therefore, there are no outliers on the lower bound. So there's no outliers on the lower side. Now I need to check the upper side. So we're going to do Q3 minus 1.5 times my IQR. Well, my Q3 was 10 plus, I'm sorry, this is plus, 10 plus 9, because 1.5 times 6, my IQR is 9, and I get 19. Now I need to ask myself, is there any number in our data set greater than 19? And there is. 21 is most definitely greater than 19. So 21 is an outlier. And that's it. Very easy, very simple. Just looking at these two numbers, and if any number is greater than or less than these two, my bounds, it is an outlier. So let's look at one more example. So find the IQR and determine if any outliers. Well, I'm going to do the same thing. They're in order from least to greatest. I can cross off, and I can start doing this to find my median. So I've got my median, and then I can find my Q1. Q1's in between these two, and we find our Q1 and Q3 when we have to do this by taking 204 plus 217, and we divide that. 204 plus 217 is 421. When I divide that by 2, we get 210.5. And that's my Q1. So to find Q3, I take 231 plus 245, which gives me 476. Divide that by 2, and we get 238. And that's my Q3. So now my IQR is going to simply be Q3 minus Q1. So I have 238 minus 210.5. And that's going to give me an IQR of 27.5. Now that I have that, I want to determine if there are any outliers. So I'm going to check the lower bound first. So I have Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR. And so my Q1 was 210.5 minus my IQR is 27.5 times 1.5. It gives me 41.25. So if I take 210 minus 41.25, that gives me 168.75. So I'm looking at my data set to see if there's any number less than 168. I look right here, my minimum is 201. There's no number less than 201, therefore there is no outlier on the lower bound. But now I need to check the upper side. So I'm looking at my upper. I have Q3 plus 1.5 times my IQR. So I have my Q3 was 238 plus my IQR times 1.5 is 41.25. So when I do 238 plus 41.25, I get 279.25. Now I look at my data set to see if there are any numbers greater than 279, and there is. 283 is an outlier. So I hope this video makes you feel comfortable about how to find outliers of a given data set. Very easy. Just remember, we got to find IQR first, which is simply Q3 minus Q1. And then I need to check my upper and my lower bounds to see if there is either an outlier on the lower end or an outlier on the upper end. I know my example about the money showed an outlier on the upper end, and both these examples showed an outlier on the upper end. But what if I was a teacher walking into a room of billionaires and we were talking about salaries? Then I would be the outlier. I would be the one making significantly less than them. So we can have outliers on the lower end. We've got to be sure to check them. But I hope this video helped. Thanks for checking it out. I'll see you next time.